deep in the ancient Finnish world, healing was not a matter of bandages and herbs alone. It was a conversation, a precise, carefully spoken conversation with the spirit world. When a wound opened and blood ran freely, the healer did not simply press cloth against skin. They spoke. They recited the names of the spirits who governed the injured part of the body, addressed them within the full weight of mythological tradition, and called them into the present moment of crisis. And among all the spirits a Finnish healer could call upon, one governed the most intimate territory of all, not the sky above or the water below, but the hidden rivers running through every living body. Her domain was the vein, the silent architecture of blood and thread beneath the skin. She was the one the wise ones reached for when life itself was leaking out. Her name was Suanitar. Welcome. If this is your first time joining this series on the deities and spirits of world mythology, I am glad you are here. If these journeys through the ancient world have meant something to you, I would be grateful if you subscribed and followed along so you never miss an episode. Each one is a door into a world that shaped the one we live in today. Now, let us step through that door. To begin with, Suanitar is to begin with language, because in Finnish mythology, as in many ancient traditions, a name was never merely a label. A name was a revelation of essence. The word Suanitar is composed of two elements drawn from the Finnish language. The first element is suani. In Finnish, suani carries a range of closely related meanings: a vein, a sinew, a tendon. It refers to the channels through which blood moves and to the cords that bind muscle to bone, the interior architecture of the living body. The second element is the suffix tar, which in Finnish marks a being as feminine and, in mythological usage, designates a goddess or a female spirit of considerable power. Suanitar, therefore, translates most directly as she of the veins, or vein woman, the feminine spirit who governs the sinews and blood vessels of every living creature. In the Finnish folk understanding of the body, veins and sinews were not merely anatomical structures to be observed and mapped. They were the channels of life itself. Blood carried warmth, vitality, and the animating spirit of a person. To damage a vein was to open a passage through which life could escape. To sever a sinew was to break a cord that held a living body in its proper form. Suanitar was the spirit who presided over those channels, the guardian of the threads that kept life from unraveling. The folk incantations recorded by scholar John Abercrombie in Magic Songs of the West Finns described her as the beauteous woman of veins and the beautiful Suanitar. The attribute of beauty was not an incidental flourish. In Finnish folk belief, beauty in a spirit was frequently associated with beneficent power, with a spirit that was well disposed toward those who invoked it correctly. To call Suanitar beautiful was to affirm that she was a healing presence, not a threatening one. She was depicted as a maiden. The incantations described her dwelling in the air, on the edge of a little cloud, suspended between the heavens and the earth, in a position from which she could observe the world below, and descend to it when summoned. When she was pictured at rest, before being called to a wound, she sat with a skein of veins on her lap and a roll of skin under her arm. These were her materials, always at hand, always ready. She was never described as arriving unprepared. Her tools were described with remarkable precision. She held a golden tuft, which is a small bundle of glowing golden fiber, the raw vein material she would spin into thread, and she worked it using a copper spinning rock, which was a smooth stone weight used to keep a spinning rod steady as it twisted fiber into thread. In Finnish folk tradition, precious metals carried spiritual and healing significance. A copper tool or a golden thread held a restorative power that iron, the metal responsible for wounds, did not. Suanitar's tools were the deliberate counterforce to iron's damage. Where iron cut, copper and gold repaired. In some variants of the incantations, she was called to arrive in a copper boat with honeyed oars, rowing not across water but through the channels of the body itself, through bones and joints, and the interior passages of the wounded person. She was asked to lengthen short veins, shorten those that were too long, and arranged them all in their proper places. Then, with her needle and thread, she stitched the ends of the broken veins closed. This image, a beautiful young maiden seated on the edge of a cloud, copper spindle in hand, golden fiber in her lap, descending in a copper boat to row through the interior of a living body, was among the most precise and most extraordinary visual descriptions in the entire corpus of Finnish healing incantation. The primary source through which Suanitar came down to later generations was the Kalevala, the Finnish national epic compiled by the physician and folklorist Elias Lönnrot. The word runo, from which the English word rune is partially derived, referred in Finnish to a song, a poem, or a chant. Each of the Kalevala's 50 runos is a distinct poetic unit, and together they weave a mythology of creation, heroism, love, sorrow, and spiritual power. The Kalevala and the broader corpus of Finnish folk incantations do not, in the material that has been preserved, offer a detailed narrative mythology of Suanitar's birth, parentage, marriage, or children. This is not unusual. Many of the most powerful spirits in Finnish mythology are defined by their function and their domain, rather than by biographical narrative. Their stories are preserved in incantation, rather than in saga. What can be said is this: the tar suffix in Finnish mythology carried in many cases a connotation of derivation, of being the feminine form or the daughter of a broader natural force. Suanitar was the feminine embodiment of the Tuoni realm of death. Suanitar, by the same logic, was the feminine embodiment of the Suoni, the vein, the sinew, the living thread. Whether this was understood as literal divine birth from some primordial parent, or as a more abstract relationship of spiritual identity with the natural domain, the surviving sources do not specify with narrative detail. What the sources do preserve, with consistency, is her function and her nature, that she is the guardian of the body's living channels. To understand how Suanitar functioned in the lives of real people, we must first understand the figure of the Tietäjä, the Finnish healer and spiritual practitioner, whose knowledge was the instrument through which beings like Suanitar were reached. The word Tietäjä came from the verb tietää, which means to know. The Tietäjä was literally the one who knew. What they knew was specific and precious: the names of the spirits, the words of the incantations, the mythological histories that gave those incantations their power, and the ritual conditions under which the spirits could be summoned and addressed. The Tietäjä was not a priest in the sense that later European religions understood priesthood. There was no formal institution, no hierarchy of ordination. The Tietäjä was recognized within their community by demonstrated ability, by healing that worked, by knowledge that proved itself in practice. Some Tietäjät were men, some were women. Some inherited their knowledge from family elders. Others were said to have acquired it through visionary experience, through near-death encounters, or through long apprenticeship. When a member of a Finnish community was wounded, the Tietäjä was summoned. And the Tietäjä's most essential tool was not a knife or a poultice, though those might also be employed. It was words. The incantations used in Finnish healing, called loitsut, were understood to be performative speech. They did not merely describe a desired reality, they enacted it. When the Tietäjä spoke the name of Suanitar and recited the words of the healing runo correctly and completely, they were understood to be genuinely summoning her, drawing her attention to the wound, establishing a relationship with her in the present moment, and authorizing her to perform her particular work. This was not metaphor. For the Finnish people of the Kalevala tradition, it was the operating reality of how the world worked. When the Tietäjä performed a complex healing, they did not invoke a single spirit. They invoked a series, each addressed to the specific part of the body in which damage had occurred. The vein fell to Suanitar, the bone fell to another, the skin to another, the flesh to another. Together, these beings constituted what might be thought of as the spiritual anatomy of the human form. Within this anatomy, Suanitar was among the most frequently invoked. This was not because veins were considered more spiritually significant than other parts of the body, but because wounds to veins were among the most immediately dangerous injuries a person could sustain. Suanitar appears in the Kalevala specifically within the corpus of healing runos, the incantations designed to address wounds, illness, and physical damage. In the healing passages of the Kalevala, the structure of an incantation involving Suanitar followed a recognizable and deliberate form. First, the Tietäjä identified the specific damage, the torn vein, the severed sinew, the flowing blood. Second, they recited a mythological narrative tracing the origin of the wound or the origin of the damaged material. Third, they invoked the appropriate spirit by name and title. Fourth, and crucially, they gave that spirit explicit instructions: what to do, how to do it, and with what effect. When Suanitar was invoked, the instructions were precise. She was called upon to spin the torn veins back together, to take the severed ends and reunite them, restoring the flow of blood to its proper channels. She was called upon to seal the wound against further blood loss, and she was called upon to restore the sinews to their proper tension and alignment. The healing runos that invoke her are among the most technically specific passages in the Kalevala tradition. The language does not generalize. It names the vein, it names the action, it names the intended result. Scholars of Finnish folk religion, including Martti Havio in his foundational work Suomalainen Mythologia and Uno Harva in Suomalaisten muinais-usko, have noted that this specificity reflected a view of healing magic as a precise technical art, not a vague appeal to supernatural goodwill. In some versions of the healing incantations, Suanitar's needle was described as being made of bone, a detail consistent with the material culture of ancient Finland, where bone needles were among the oldest and most practical tools. Her thread was sinew, the very material she governed. Among the most important and most intellectually distinctive features of Finnish healing magic was the use of Synnyt, origin myths, as instruments of power within the incantations. In Finnish folk belief, to know the origin of something was to possess authority over it. If you knew how iron came to be, the myth of its first smelting, the story of how it first drew blood, you could address iron directly, could speak to its nature, could compel it to yield to you. The healing incantations that invoked Suanitar frequently incorporated the synty of blood and veins. Before calling her name, the Tietäjä would recite the mythological history of veins. By reciting this origin, the healer was aligning himself with the primordial moment at which veins were created, and was drawing the authority of that moment into the present healing situation. In the understanding of the tradition, veins were not naturally occurring structures. They were spun. Suanitar herself had spun the first veins into the first living bodies. That original act of spinning was the root of all her authority. The Tietäjä recited this origin not as a piece of interesting mythology, but as a claim, an assertion that the healer understood the full history of what lay damaged before them, and therefore held the standing to address Suanitar directly and instruct her in her work. Once the synty was recited, the invocation followed. The healer named Suanitar, named her title, named her tools, and gave her explicit instruction, where the vein was torn, what it needed, how she was to spin it closed. The origin myth and the practical instruction were two parts of a single ritual act. One could not work without the other. Suanitar's domain placed her in a uniquely charged position in relation to the boundary between life and death, and this was a dimension of her nature that Finnish mythology took seriously. She was not a goddess of death, but Suanitar stood at the very threshold between these two domains. The vein was the borderline between life and death. When a vein opened and blood poured freely, life was moving toward its end. When the vein was sealed and blood returned to its channel, life continued. Suanitar presided over that moment, the moment of decision between wholeness and dissolution, between continuation and the journey to Tuonela, which is the land of the dead. The blood escaping the wound was understood as life departing toward the land of the dead. The Tietäjä's incantation called it back. Suanitar was the spirit who held the door, who could keep life from crossing into Tuonela before its proper time. No spirit in Finnish mythology was without boundaries. The powers of every haltia and every goddess were defined by the edges of their domain, and Suanitar was no exception. Her most fundamental limitation was jurisdictional. She governed veins, sinews, and blood. She did not govern bone. That was a separate domain requiring separate invocation. She did not govern the spirit. Illness caused by curse, by spiritual intrusion, or by the displeasure of other spirits fell outside her authority. Her power was also contingent on the correct performance of the healing ritual. Finnish folk belief understood the relationship between a tietäjä and a spirit as one that required precise maintenance. The incantation had to be spoken correctly, with the right words, in the right sequence, under the right ritual conditions. A tietäjä who mispronounced the runo, who performed the invocation in an incomplete or structurally incorrect manner, could not expect Suanitar to respond. Her power was real and accessible, but it was not unconditional. It answered to knowledge and to correctness. A third limitation was that her authority extended only over the world of the living. She held the threshold against Tuonela, but she could not reach across it. If a wound was too severe, if the life force had already departed the body and begun its journey to the land of the dead, Suanitar could not call it back. She could spin a vein closed. She could not reanimate a vein that had already lost its living occupant. The border she guarded was permeable only from within the world of the living. Once crossed, it was Tuonela's domain, and Suanitar had no authority there. A fourth, subtler limitation was the dual-edged nature of specialized knowledge in Finnish folk tradition. The Tietäjä, who knew how to invoke Suanitar for healing, possessed knowledge that could theoretically be turned in the other direction. Invoked not to seal a vein, but to open one, not to still blood, but to provoke its loss. Finnish folk belief recognized this as a live moral tension. The same knowledge that gave a healer their power also gave them potential for harm. This was understood as a weight carried by every Tietäjä, and it shadowed the domain of every healing spirit, including Suanitar. Suanitar was not a goddess of thunderclaps and cosmic drama. She was something quieter than that, and in some ways more profound. She was the guardian of the body's hidden rivers, the one who stood at the point where life could slip away, thread and needle in hand, spinning what had been broken back into wholeness. She lived in the incantations of the Tietäjä, in the healing runos of the Kalevala, in the ancient understanding that the world was full of presences, some vast as the sky and some no larger than the thread of a vein, and that knowing their names and speaking those names with care was one of the most important things a human being could do. The Finnish people who preserved her name across centuries of oral tradition understood something that is easy to lose in the modern world, that the most intimate things, the pulse of blood, the tension of a tendon, the quiet work of repair that happens within the body every day, are not less worthy of reverence for being small. They are more worthy of it. Thank you so much for listening. If this journey through the mythology of Suanitar has meant something to you, I would be truly grateful if you shared this episode with someone who loves history, mythology, and the ancient world. Sharing it is the most generous thing you can do to help this series reach the people who would love it. And if you haven't already, subscribing and following the channel means you will be with us for every episode that comes next. There are many more deities, spirits, and legendary figures waiting in these ancient forests and rivers and halls. Come back and explore them with us. Until next time, thank you for being here.